And then we have this word na'budu. This noon here, it means we. And ayn and ba and dal mean worship, like abd. So na'bud, you alone, we worship. And the first thing we have to ask ourselves when we talk about that is we have to ask ourselves, what is worship? We have to ask ourselves, what is worship? Because until we understand worship, or until we understand worship properly, we don't really understand what we mean by that commitment we made to Allah. Iyyaka na'bud. You alone we worship. Only you we worship. This is important to understand because really now everything is going to come down to mafhumul ibadah. Everything is going to come down to this. The understanding of worship. And I believe this is actually what Sheikh Abdul Rahman is doing with his advanced class right now regarding one of the books that he's written on the topic of mafhum al-ibadah and ta'arif al-ibadah or mafhum al-ibadah. What is the understanding of worship? Because this now is absolutely critical for us. We've made a pledge and a promise and a statement of testimony to Allah that we will only worship Him. And yes, there is going to be some people who don't take that seriously and who divert other acts of worship to others besides Allah. But generally speaking, it's going to come down to the understanding of what worship is. And I'm not going to overly complicate this because this is a beginner level class, but I'm just going to talk about worship in a couple of different ways here. So there's a couple of different ways that we're going to talk about worship here. So the first thing we're going to say when we talk about worship is that worship revolves around I'm not going to use the word complete, I'm going to use the word total. Humility and love. That is what worship is, the essence of it, or the core of it, that the spirit of it, if you like, is kamal al-dhul wa kamal al-mahabba. It is total and utter humility, and within humility we can also mention their submission, and total and complete love. Now that doesn't give you a definition. That's not a definition. And that's why a lot of, kind of criticism or a lot of discussion and a lot of back and forward between people goes around this, and people say, well, how do you define that? And how do you define what total love is? And that's true. It's not a definition. It's just the spirit of worship. The essence of worship is complete humility and submission and complete and total love. That's the spirit of it and the essence of it. Now, if we talk about a more kind of comprehensive definition, then perhaps one of the most comprehensive definitions we can give is that worship is a comprehensive term for everything that Allah loves and is pleased with, whether statements or actions whether internal or external. And that quote is from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. He said, a comprehensive term for everything that Allah loves and is pleased with, whether statements or actions, and whether we are talking about something which is internal or external. So statements or actions, meaning that it could be statements of the tongue, actions of the tongue. So here we need to understand with statements, these statements could be statements of the tongue, and they could also be statements of the heart. And actions could be actions of the tongue or the heart or the limbs, which gives us 5 things, right? We'll number them like this: statements of the heart, statement of the tongue, and actions of the heart, we'll label that number 3, of the tongue number 4, and the limbs number 5. So that gives us 5 combinations, and those combinations are related to whether it is internal or external. So let's look at each one of these in turn. Let's look at statements of the heart. So a statement of the heart is effectively, in essence, a statement of the heart refers to your beliefs, your aqidah, creed, whatever you want to call it around that, beliefs, aqidah, creed. They are the statements, the manifesto of your heart, the statements of what your heart actually believes to be the truth about Allah and this religion of Islam and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Those fundamental beliefs, those are the statements of your heart. And the statements of your tongue express those beliefs. So that is the shahada. We're not here talking about actions of the tongue, like, for example, dhikr or reciting the Qur'an. That comes under actions of the tongue. A statement of the tongue is related to the heart. So it's where we take these beliefs and this aqidah and this creed and we express it on our tongue. And of course, the heart, statements of the heart are internal, statements of the tongue are external. So you are professing your belief on your tongue. You are professing the beliefs and the aqidah, the creed that is within your heart. You're expressing that on your tongue. Then you have actions of the heart. And actions of the heart, there are so many that we could give. We'll just give an example of loving Allah, hoping in Allah, fearing Allah. These are actions of the heart. Actions of the tongue, like dhikr, reciting the Qur'an. Actions of the limbs, like, for example, giving charity, for example. So that is the definition of worship according to Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala. Of course, my translation, rough translation. Worship is a comprehensive term for everything Allah loves and is pleased with, whether statements or actions, statements being either of the heart or the tongue. So that's your beliefs, your aqidah, your creed, and you expressing that through the shahada or the shahadatain, the two testimonies of faith. And actions, whether that be actions of the heart, which are internal, actions of the tongue, like dhikr, which are external, and actions of the limbs, like giving charity. Very good question. And I kind of want you to answer this question yourself. Would actions of the limbs include salah? Actually, in reality, salah, it's a bit more than that. Salah actually comes under really all of the types of actions, because salah includes the movements in the prayer. which are actions of the limbs. It includes the dhikr and recitation, which is actions of the tongue. And it includes the khushu', which is an action of the heart. And of course, it encompasses also the statement of the tongue, because in your salah, you are going to say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah inside of the tashahhud. And that's all built upon your beliefs. So certainly all of the types of actions, the salah would come under all of the types of actions. And indeed, you can even bring in the statements in there as well. But I would say as an action, our prayer comes into all of those aspects. And that itself is a virtue of the prayer, and why the prayer is so important, because the prayer covers all of those actions. And it's not just movement of the limbs or, sort of worship of Allah in the heart. And it's not also just remembrance on the tongue, but it's something very, very comprehensive and detailed. There is another definition that I wanted to share with you. I don't know if I have it available, but let me just get that. In the meantime, I'll answer a quick question one of the students asked, a very nice question. Does that mean we can disbelieve through these 5 ways? So first of all, the core of disbelief, no doubt, would be through statements of the heart, right? Someone doesn't believe in Islam in their heart, or holds a belief in Islam in their heart, which is a matter of disbelief. But certainly there are actions of disbelief that can take place on the tongue. Making fun of Islam would be an example of that. Actions of disbelief that can take place in the heart, which are not aqeedah, but are actions. Yes, loving someone else the way that you love Allah, or fearing someone else the way that you fear Allah. And likewise, through actions of the limbs, praying to other than Allah, sacrificing to other than Allah. So yes, disbelief and actions. Let's try to be nice and precise here, so we don't get into issues relating to takfir and things like that. But the action of disbelief, or the cause of disbelief, can take place across the whole spectrum of statements and actions. That's true. Okay, I was in the middle of looking for something. Just wanted to grab this definition so that I get it right. Okay, yeah, I've got the one that I wanted to give you as well. So I'm just going to mention it down here, and then we can clean up the page as well. So let's just, maybe we can just make this thickness and touchness be fine. So I'm going to give you one more definition of ibadah, and that is voluntary submission It's difficult to translate this one. It's difficult to translate this one. It's not amazing. The translation I've given you is not amazing. I just did it quickly. But this is the definition of al-Muallimi, Yahya al-Muallimi, rahimahullah ta'ala. And it's seen to be a very, very precise definition. It was well taken, and it's seen that it answers a lot of issues that people misunderstood in other definitions. So I think it's well worth us just bearing in mind that definition, and I'll try and explain what it is. maybe I don't know whether the last part I translated it very well, but we'll try our best. So he said, خضوع اختياري. It is a voluntary submission. Because in reality, everything in this universe submits to the qadr of Allah. You cannot escape it. Muslim, kafir, whether it is animate, inanimate objects, every single thing in this universe submits to the decree of Allah and to the laws and the rules of Allah in the universe. But not everybody submits to, not everybody submits to Allah willingly. So it is a voluntary, let's just make this a little bit better. Let's call it a voluntary act of submission, seeking a benefit which is from the unseen. So he said, خضوع اختياري لطلب نفع غيبي. So why are you doing that voluntary act of submission? Because I could do a voluntary act of submission and it wouldn't be worship. Like for example, if let's say an act of humility, an act of submission towards a person, but I'm seeking, let's say I'm seeking money. I'm doing a job for somebody. So I voluntarily agree to do what they say, to follow their commands. But I want to get paid at the end of the week or at the end of the month. So here he limited this to when it is seeking a benefit which is from the unseen, seeking Jannah, seeking the forgiveness of Allah, seeking what is with Allah from reward, protection from the hellfire. We ended up with a voluntary act of submission, seeking benefit which is from the unseen. And that is also, I think it's a very beneficial definition. And I'm going to tell you why none of these definitions are the right one. I'm going to tell you that in a moment, and I'm going to tell you why, inshallah. But it is very beneficial because it does answer a lot of confusion people have about what's worship and what's not worship. So it is an act of khudu', an act of submission, an act of humility. And the reason for that act is that you are seeking a benefit which is from the unseen. You are not seeking a worldly benefit. You are not seeking a something which is in the hands of a person. Now, someone say, well, what about if I make dua to Allah for rizq? I make dua to Allah for money. Well, you can make dua to Allah for money because that is an unseen request. You're asking Allah to provide you rizq, and asking Allah to provide you rizq is not asking, it's not like when you go to your employer and say, I worked, 35 hours this week, can you pay me? When you're asking Allah for rizq, you're asking Allah al-Latif, the one who is the most subtle, the one you're asking him to send you the causes of that rizq, wherever it might be. That's an unseen benefit. That's a benefit from the unseen. You're not asking for, something which is, when you're asking Allah Azza wa Jal to give you children, when you're asking Allah Azza wa Jal to give you children, you're asking for naf'un ghaybi in reality. Because it's not in the end of the day, the process of having children is not the issue here. The issue is that for that to end in you actually having a child is something ghaybi. It's something which is from the unseen. It's not in the hands of any person. It's only in the hands of Allah. And that's why with all the IVF and treatments and what have you, they cannot in the end guarantee that a person will be able to have a child. So that's still naf'un ghaybi. So it is a very, very good definition. One of the students made a good comment, providing the act should be in line with the sunnah, correct? No doubt, but it doesn't come under the ta'rif of worship. We're not talking about whether the act of worship is sunnah or bid'ah. We're not talking about whether it's done the right way or the wrong. We're just talking about the what is worship. Somebody says to you, what do you mean? Iyyaka na'budu. We only worship you, O Allah. Okay, what do you mean? What do you mean that you only worship Allah? You know, if I go to a grave and I put up my hands and I say, "Oh, Abdul Qadir Jilani, ask Allah for me that Allah gives me a child." Have I committed an act of worship? Have I done an act of worship? In reality, I've done an act of submission, right? I've raised my hands. I've called out to that person in the grave. And the thing that I'm asking for is naf'un ghaybi. It is an unseen benefit. It's a benefit from the unseen. It's not something I didn't, knock on the door of the watchman and say, "Can I have the key, please?" I asked for a child. And I asked him to ask Allah. This is an ibadah in the end of the day. Calling upon that individual. It doesn't matter that I'm asking him to ask Allah, because I am committing an act of submission and humility, and I'm seeking a benefit that's from the unseen. So it's a very, very good definition. It does clear up a lot of things. Why are none of these definitions perfect? Simply, the problem is not with these mashayikh, not with Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah or al-Allama al-Muallimi. The problem is with definitions itself. The problem is with the concept of definitions. This is the problem here. This is the problem. All the problem lies right here. That definitions in themselves are not precise. This idea that you're supposed to bring a definition, and everyone says it, you're supposed to bring a definition, and this is the gold standard. It should be comprehensive. It should be exclusive. What do we mean by those two things? Comprehensive means everything goes in that should be in there. And exclusive means everything that should be outside is outside. So comprehensive, everything that should be in is in. And exclusive, everything that should be out is out. The reality is that this is extremely, extremely rare. And in reality, what you should see is that definitions are things which help you to understand. They are not perfect, and they are not absolutely comprehensive and exclusive in every single way. So can you go to the definition of al-Muallimi and find something that doesn't fit? Sure you can. No doubt. And that's why, for example, you have, I'm just reading an article right now by Sheikh Abdurrahman bin Nasir al-Barrak, and he's, pulling apart the definition of al-Muallimi. That it's not comprehensive, and it's not this, and it's not good enough, and it has this in it. And that's because the whole idea is wrong. When you believe that a definition is absolute and every single thing that should be in there will be in there, and every single thing that should not be in there will be excluded, in reality, most of the time, you're going to realize that you're going to fall short. But when you see a definition as something which is there for taqreebul fahm, it's there to help you to understand better, then yes, the definition of Muallimi is amazing, and it clears up a lot of confusion. And the definition of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah is really helpful. But in reality, what is the essence of worship? I don't need to explain the essence of worship to you, because you already understand worship itself. And that's why, if worship was something that really needed to be defined to the last dot and the last letter, Allah would have already given us that definition, as He did in the Qur'an. Whatever we need to know about worship, Allah has told us. The word worship is well known. And that's why when you see somebody at a graveside raising his hands, I don't need to give you the definition of al-Muallimi to prove to you that person is doing an act of worship. You know instinctively that that person is doing an act of worship, because worship is something that is well understood. So I'm not criticizing the definitions at all. I love the definition of al-muallimi, and it's fantastic. I love the definition of Shaykh al-Islam, Ibn Taymiyyah. It's amazing. Once you realize that definitions are there to support your learning, but they aren't there to be wahi, to be revelation, to be the final answer for everything, and you cannot, find any fault in them. They're human effort. You're going to find, there'll be a little exception here, there'll be this is here, this is there. Reality is worship is something which is well understood. And so we can move on from that with a good understanding of Iyaka na'budu. You alone we worship.